All right, welcome back to the channel. So in this video, we're going to talk about Errol Spence and Manny Pacquiao and the prediction for the fight made by a common opponent named Chris Algieri, and give my 2 cents on it, which is basically this fight will come down to whether or not Errol Spence Jr. will choke. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. And before I get into the subject matter of the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel. Also, hit the like button, share the videos, because it does do a it's very important and helps the channel grow. Let's get into the subject matter. Ellie Sethback of ESNEWS recently did an interview, one of the spot interviews that he does with a boxer named Chris Algieri. If you're not familiar with who Chris Algieri is a former 140-pound champion who believe he won the title off of Ruslan Provodnikov back in, I guess it was sometime between 2000 and 2010. But after that, he had a fight with Manny Pacquiao. He lost to Manny Pacquiao. He was knocked down by Manny Pacquiao something like 8 times. People thought Manny Pacquiao was going to be able to get Chris Algieri out of there, but he never did occur. Chris Algieri also had a fight with Errol Spence Jr. Earlier in Errol Spence Jr.'s career, before Errol Spence Jr. won a title, and Errol Spence Jr. definitely knocked Chris Algieri out in a fight that was very fun to watch. Really showed that Errol knew how to cut off the ring. Actually, is one of my favorite fights to watch with Errol Spence Jr. So Chris Algieri was asked about the outcome of the up-and-coming fight, which is between Errol Spence Jr. and Manny Pacquiao, which will be taking place in, I believe, the last week of August in Las Vegas. And he gave his 2 cents, and basically what he said was that he believed that that looking at age, looking at size, and looking at strength, that Errol Spence Jr. was too young, too big, and too strong for Manny Pacquiao at this point in his career. But in answering the question, he was Ellie Sethback followed up with a bunch of questions I thought were very, very good questions that kind of gave an idea of, gave a little bit better insight into what he thought. He asked specifically about the characteristics of each of the fighters. So, for example, he asked Chris Algieri, who do you think has the speed advantage? When Chris Algieri asked about that, he kind of looked back and thought about it for a second. He was like, Manny Pacquiao, I think, has the speed advantage and just the hand speed, but there's things that he was like, it's kind of comparing apples and oranges because of the way that Errol Spence Jr. fights and the pressure that he keeps on you. And then he also asked about other ones. He said, what about power? And he said, oh, power, Manny Pacquiao for one punch power, but Errol Spence Jr. has a lot of, he has a good, strong power, and he really does go to the body very well. Then he asked him about footwork. And he said, well, Manny Pacquiao's in and out footwork is probably better, but in his timing and kind of his ability to throw you off rhythm is something that he thought was pretty exceptional, that he had never really been in the ring with anybody that had footwork like that could really throw you off. And then he talked about ring generalship, and he said that ring generalship, he almost kind of said it was a tie, but edged it towards Manny Pacquiao. So Manny Pacquiao, he gave the advantage to Manny Pacquiao in almost every individual characteristic is that that you associate with boxing, except for the youth, the size, and when he says he's too strong, I mean, I guess his physical strength in the ring versus his punching power. So that's when he said about that. But this is my thing. If I'm looking at it from that standpoint, it's obvious that if you really believe that age is an issue, then speed is not going to be the advantage of Manny Pacquiao. Most likely, the footwork in the timing and rhythm, all that is probably not going to be an advantage for Manny Pacquiao in this fight. But I'll tell you what I really think is like where the risk is, and I think where the risk has been definitely with Keith Thurman. In the Keith Thurman fight, I don't think Manny Pacquiao really had a speed advantage. I don't really think that he had much of a power advantage from what I could see against Keith Thurman. But what I do think he had a mental edge on Keith Thurman. And I think the risk for Errol Spence Jr. is that Manny Pacquiao will have a mental edge in the fight. And by that I mean, if you look back at Floyd Mayweather Jr. during, let's say, the last 6 or 7 fights that he had of real boxing matches. I'm not talking about the stuff that he did, this thing that he did with Logan Paul, or what he did with the guy from Japan, or even the Conor McGregor fight. I'm talking about the real, actual boxing matches that Floyd Mayweather had. Floyd Mayweather Jr. would always say that it's different fighting under the big lights. And what that means is that it's different when you have the whole world watching you and you have to actually perform under a big spotlight. And I think what you'll find is that Manny Pacquiao, because he's been under the lights so often, does not choke under the lights. And because he's familiar with that environment, more familiar with that environment than Keith Thurman was, that Keith Thurman probably fought a little bit out of sorts, had an extra bit of nervousness and really couldn't handle the moment. So the question for me is, will Errol Spence Jr. be able to handle the moment as well as Manny Pacquiao will handle the moment? Because if he doesn't handle the moment, then he could go off and not listen to his coach, kind of be stuck in this deer in a headlights type of situation, where similar to, like, one of the best examples of somebody that I believe choked under the pressure of a fight was when when Floyd Mayweather Jr. fought not Victor Ortiz. What is his name? I think it is. Yeah, Victor Ortiz. When he fought Victor Ortiz, and Victor Ortiz wound up, elbowing him or doing a ridiculous headbutt to him, and then trying to hug and make up. And then when he tried to reach out, hug and make up, Floyd Mayweather Jr. hits him across the chin, knocks him out. And Victor Ortiz probably could have got up, but he was still so frozen and shook from the magnitude of the situation that he didn't get back up. So that's I think is the risk for Errol Spence Jr. here, but I don't think it's much of a risk because Errol Spence Jr. has been fighting top competition for a while now, and that started with the fight that he had with over there, and he traveling over to the UK to fight Kell Brook, and it's continued on through the other big fights that he's had to date. So all in all, I give the advantage to Errol Spence Jr., but I do think that the risk is similar to what I believe happened with Jermell Charlo. I think Jermell Charlo choked a little bit in his fight with Brian Castano. That, I think, would be the risk for Errol Spence, but I don't think it's a big one. Anyway, you let me know what you think in the comment section, and with that, I'm out.